Today I want to ask you, are you operating under a false ID? Have you ever operated under a false identification? I have. Many people are living their lives getting into places, doing things that they were never meant to be because they're operating on a fake ID, on a false identity. I'm going to share a story with you about a young girl. She lied to her parents. She stole money from them. She went out. She went and bought a fake ID. Fake name, fake age. She went out that night and the fake ID allowed her to get into a place that she wasn't meant to be at. She walked in, she got drunk, she took drugs, she hooked up with a guy, which resulted in being raped by a multitude of guys in the bathroom. She came out overheated, and she died on the dance floor of a place that she was never meant to be because she was operating with a false identity. How many of us are walking around operating on a false identity? How many of us have an identity crisis where we don't know who we are, what we're supposed to look like, where we're supposed to be, what kind of friends we're supposed to have, what love looks like? How many of us, how many of you are operating on a false ID? Think about it. Okay, Stevie, we get the message, but what's your point? Okay, great, I'm glad you asked. Because when operating under a false identity, what happens? We do things that we normally wouldn't do if we knew where our identity lied or who the entity, our ID, our identification, and what entity are we in. Just think of the word ID, entity, ID, entity. My ID is in what entity? What entity am I operating from? Identity. Identity. When we operate from a place of order, discipline, assurance, confirmation, discernment, fruits of the Spirit, when we're operating through our natural design, through the ID that was meant for us, through the identification that we're called to be, we can make better, healthier decisions. We don't beat ourselves up. We don't pick ourselves apart. We don't have hatred and judgment for others because we're operating through the correct identity and the correct entity. I don't know about you, but I've operated under a false ID plenty of times and got myself into plenty of trouble because the entity that was moving through me and that I thought that I wanted to be a part of was no good. It was the spirit of chaos, a spirit of self-destructive behaviors, a spirit of anger, a spirit of jealousy, a spirit of just being out of control, a spirit of drunkenness, a spirit of rage, a spirit of sadness and depression and anxiety, a spirit of being orphaned, a spirit of all of these different things. They're not the right entity. They were never the right entity. And had I had been operating under the right ID through the correct entity, then those things may not have happened. But by the grace of God, he uses our testimony to help others and to be a light in a dark place, because the things that he brought me out of when I was operating on a false identity, I learned from those things. So the things that I didn't grow up knowing, I know now, and I'm able to make sacrifices and invest my time and be willing and open enough to go back into those places I know I once was, with a map on how to get out, and with a testimony that testifies as a witness to others to prevent them from doing the same things. Because when you operate on a false identity, you get in places that were never meant for you. That seat's not yours. It's a false identity. That guy you're with, false identity. That girl you're with, false identity. This is a time for us to be able to really assess our true identity and which ID we want to be operating in through which entity. And when we operate through a godly or a holy entity, when we live off of biblical principles of integrity and honor and love and peace and joy and forgiveness and all that good stuff, we're sure to get through this journey and this path as we're passing through a lot better, a lot easier, with a lot less torture, with a lot more tools than when we're operating under a false identity where we are tortured and attacked and kicked while we're down. So be sure to check yourself and make sure you're not operating under a false identity, because it will take you to places that were never meant for you.